room acoustics are a little bit complicated, and especially if you're doing it on a budget using free software like Room EQ Wizard and a measurement microphone like the Behringer ECM 8000, which is only $30. You might not understand what the heck you're actually doing. I want you to understand that acoustic panels do make a difference. That's obvious. But a lot of people get the misconception of what exactly acoustic treatment is helping with in the room. We're going to be talking about measuring your studio, what to look out for in measuring your studio, what's actually important, and what we can do to actually improve your room altogether. Let's get into it. So right now I have a software called Room EQ Wizard pulled up. This software is free. It allows you to take a microphone like this and a cheap interface like I have been using with the Volt 476 and giving you the ability to measure your speakers and how the room reacts with its room nodes and what kind of frequency response you actually have in your listening position. One of the first things that you'll get with a measurement microphone like this especially is a calibration file. So whenever you go into your preferences, I'm going to click Command comma. That's going to give us some preferences here. Up at the top left, there's a calibration file. One of the first things you're going to want to add and download from the Behringer website is a calibration file. Basically what this is a file. It's a generic file for Behringer, but a lot of the measurement microphones out there base it off of their serial number. It's a designated file to compensate for the lack of potential unflat frequency responses, like especially in the high end, it gets a little deviated. And I'll throw up a graph here wherever. But for the most part, the frequency spectrum on this measurement microphone, not only being 360 degrees, is consistently linear, down from 20 hertz all the way to 20K. So the other thing we would want to do is calibrate the sound card. I'm not going to go too deep into this, but the concept is taking the output that you are sending to your speakers and plugging it into the input that you would usually plug your measurement microphone into. And what it's going to do is it's going to calibrate the sound card just to make sure that there's not any other inconsistencies in the sound card itself. But we're going to get into that into a different video that actually deals with calibration. What I want to show you here, obviously based on the title of the video, is if acoustic treatment actually works. So yes, acoustic treatment works. But what is it actually doing? Let's take a look at a sine wave sweep from 20 hertz to 20 kilohertz that I did with my left speaker. This was before treatment. At first glance, this looks pretty ugly. Like this looks nowhere near flat. That's fine. And most of the time, especially without treatment, it's not going to be flat and it's not going to be anywhere near flat. And right now we're actually taking a look at 20 hertz to 2 kilohertz. I'm going to change the limits on this to 20,000 just real quick, but I want to show you something that will help us a little later on when we analyze the graphs. It's pretty ugly. We're getting dips below 45 dB. The main thing we're going to worry about in terms of especially acoustic treatment is going to be the low frequencies and what's going to be called a waterfall graph, or in our case, we're going to be using a spectrogram. So for now, let's just take a look at 2000 hertz. So we have a bit of a peak here at 52 hertz and a big dip at 77 hertz and another peak at 108, another peak at 140. Obviously not flat. And I'm actually in a pretty big room. It's a little square-ish, but I'm only using half of the room for now. Main thing is that the sound is traveling further than what I'm actually using in the usable space, which is great to have. I'm gonna go ahead and show you and spoil you, save you the time from waiting to the end of the video, of what happened when I measured the exact same place. I'm measuring this in the center of my mix position, pointing the measurement mic at the speaker, because that's how the calibration file works for the ECM 8000. Is that right? Yeah, ECM 8000. So I'm gonna pull up that suite. Well, that doesn't even look any better with treatment. I mean, we fixed a few nulls at about 500 hertz, but we've actually, looks like, gained a few more in the process. So what's actually going on here? Well, first of all, this frequency graph is hyper accurate, so it's picking up every detail in the room. And if I move it back to 20,000 hertz, you'll really see that, yeah, it's not being more beneficial either way. And my range right now is at about 55 to 100 SPL. our max being about 95 SPL, and you're not seeing a huge difference. So why is that? Well, mainly when it comes to room nodes at such high frequencies, we as humans are not going to be able to hear those nearly as clear. The main thing we're going to be worried about is the decay time and how long these higher frequencies hang out in the room while I'm trying to mix. It's kind of like adding a subtle reverb to your master bus when you don't want that reverb to be there. The frequency response graph doesn't show us this. What will show us this, if I go back to our first sweep, I'm gonna go to the button waterfall here, which is what most acousticians will be using in terms of measuring your room. What this is basically showing us is peak volume over time. So off to the right, we got our key here. We're at 91 decibels. We're kind of in the red. We got that at about 52 hertz, like we said before. And along the side grid coming towards the screen, and you can kind of see these waves are just like shoved up against the screen is what it kind of looks like, is the reverberation time of the frequency in the room. Now to me, I know there's a way to adjust all of these parameters and make it look better, but I think a better way to analyze this is using what's called a spectrogram. And it looks almost exactly the same, only this time it's a little more tangible. On the right key, we got milliseconds all the way up to 1 second. And on the bottom key, we have our frequency, and the color of our frequency that is at its peak and how long it's hanging out in the room is our SPL. So the hotter the signal, the SPL in the room, the redder the frequency. And one of the first things I'm sure you'll notice is that there's a long tail at 20 hertz. So this frequency is hanging out even at 60 dB, or let's say 55 dB at its purpliest. That's a new word. Purpliest is hanging out for almost a full second, 0.9 seconds or 9 milliseconds. But in the grand scheme of things, I don't usually use anything below 30 hertz anyways, and I usually end up filtering it out altogether in the mix. Now, I've been working in Dolby Atmos more recently, and I may change my mind on that, where I now have subwoofers, and when you're producing and mixing content in Dolby Atmos, you want to dedicate low frequency content as low as you can, in my opinion. But let's continue looking at this graph, because this graph doesn't just apply to Dolby Atmos. This is mainly actually in stereo, or for our instance right now, we're just measuring the left speaker. It's just in mono. What this graph is telling me that at 20 to 30 hertz, we have about 4 milliseconds of reverberation time. Same at 36 hertz. We got a longer reverberation at about half a second at about 52 hertz. We'll have to inspect that a little later. And then you have a bunch of other frequencies at about 3 milliseconds. And while it might look kind of consistent, you kind of get a drop off here after 1K, and then it starts looking a little more consistent even without treatment. So overall, this graph looks pretty good in terms of how much reverb we have in the room before we even add any treatment. So now let's go take a look at what the spectrogram looks like when we add treatment to the left speaker. I mean, measuring the left speaker with acoustic treatment in the room, you know? So obviously we still have that 20 hertz because 20 hertz is going to be based off of a room node in the room, and I do not have enough treatment to cover that room node, which is totally fine. Like I mentioned, I don't use anything below that frequency range anyways, but we still got a big peak at 55, 52 hertz. So we're gonna take a look at a room mode calculator and maybe see if we can figure out where that is, where we can put treatment, and maybe figure out what's going on in that area. We also have a big dip. You can kind of see that there's a lot less frequency energy at 73 hertz, so we're gonna keep that in mind as well. But when you look at the rest of the frequency spectrum, all the way from 100 hertz up to even 1K, like we were talking about before, which was originally at 3 milliseconds, 0.3 seconds, has now been reduced down to almost 2 milliseconds. And while in some rooms that might seem like a lot, it's consistent, it's even, so I'll be able to understand it better when all the frequencies are in that same range than if I were to have a peak here and there at certain frequencies. So overall, Basically what acoustic treatment is going to help you with in terms of using porous absorption, it's going to help you get rid of those reverb times and make everything a lot more consistent overall. Even though it might not help with your frequency response all that much, the main thing is being able to reference your music and other people's music in a system that is more consistent than it were to not have treatment at all. Hey, Future Alex here. First of all, I want to apologize for all the mistakes. I meant hundreds of milliseconds, like 300 milliseconds, 400 milliseconds, not 4 milliseconds, which is what I said throughout the video. But I fixed that in post. Shame on me. But I forgot to add what you could do to actually improve the frequency response. And maybe even some of those reverberation times is to build tuned panels or buy tuned panels that help with those resonant frequencies. Now, of course, I hope to do this later on down the line, but especially for home studios, this is not something I recommend doing because it's so costly and the benefits might not actually work out in your favor as much as what you might hope it would when making that investment. The panels that we used in this video are just 6-inch porous rock wool absorbers, stuff you can buy at Home Depot and Lowe's. And yes, I know there are better options like Owens Cornering, but it's what I had available and it's what I could afford. And I think the main part about when it comes to actually placing that acoustic treatment is getting your first reflections taken care of and out of the way before anything else. What you can do to figure out these reflection points is taking a mirror and running it along the wall. And when you look in that mirror in your mix position, you can actually see the speaker in the mirror, and that actually indicates your first reflection points. That's where the sound is going to reverberate off of the wall and into your mix position, which is not what you want. You don't want it. And you want to add a panel for every spot that you can do that. Now for me, I'm working in Dolby Atmos, so it's a little more complicated and I require a lot more acoustic treatment, which is why I built so many panels. But for you, it might be just 2 on your left and right, 2 behind you, and 2 above you, and you're set to go. Now, of course, the more treatment, the better, but sometimes we might not have the budget for more treatment. I hope this video helped you. Let me know down in the comments if you have some stories about what you learned about acoustic treatment in your rooms and maybe something I missed in this video that's really important. But other than that, I hope to see you in the next video.